In this lesson, we're going to talk about a different approach to painting trees. We're going to start out a little thinner to control the thickness of paint. Sometimes we get too thick too soon and we kind of lose control of that thickness halfway through the painting. This way we're going to start thinner and then build up the lights to get them thicker, because it's the lights that need the thicker paint, not the darks necessarily. And while we're doing that, trying to get more control, the focus is still bigger shapes, no detail to begin with, and then gradually deciding where to add a little bit of detail. Okay, now today we're going to be talking about a technique with trees. All the trees are green pretty much, so we're going to talk about variations of green, how you think through mixing different greens without the painting looking boring. Really emphasizing the chances you get in a green summer painting to get, in this case, some of the blues, the blue in here, the sky being very light, and it's cloudy in this image, but I would warm up that sky because it's white clouds, the sun is behind the clouds, so they're going to have a bit more of a warmth than just a cold steel gray. So using a white and yellow ochre with a little purple dioxide or some kind of violet, but the violet cools it down, the yellow warms it up. Orange and blue would work okay, but it gets gray so fast. But ochre and a little bit of violet would work well. Then with this kind of painting, we have the shapes here of the trees, especially the greens, even if it's real thin and wispy, like these aspens in here, start off with a real definite shape. Now I might vary the shape more than the photograph, create bigger areas of solid green, and then maybe a few more bigger areas of sky showing through. I tend to not get the painting too spotty like it is here, just dots of leaves. You might be able to do that in an area or two around the focal point, but be careful with that. But I want bigger solid shapes, even with the evergreen trees here, more solid. Think about the pattern or the shape of the tree. You want to kind of redesign it. We're not copying what we see. We're designing a better painting, and the photograph is just a starting place. So what I've done here is I want to talk about negative painting, using the background to cut in and shape up the foreground. So for instance, these yellow-green aspens, I got a slightly warmer sky and cut into the yellow-greens. It's hard to see the temperature change, but this is warmer, and you can see where I've cut into the shape. And I got rid of, if you just stare at those yellow-green leaves, I got rid of a lot of the detail, that little detail, and with the sky, and cut in and shaped up the greens. So in my painting, I'll start, after I get the drawing down, with the dark greens. These aren't real dark, but they're still, everything's in shadow on a cloudy day to some degree. So I'd start with the value in here, get it the shape I want, and then when I get to the sky, I cut into that shape to shape it up. Also, cut into the trunks with the sky, and cut into the trunks with the background blue here. Same thing with these dark evergreens over here, using the sky too. You can see the photograph, it's more photographic looking, kind of detail oriented, the edges are. But when I cut into it, I can shape it up better. Now, I can't soften the edges here, but I really want to get into softening edges on the edges of trees. So we're just taking that next step, which would be to, after you get the trees to this stage, coming in and softening the edges. And the key is not to get it all too soft or all real hard. I want a variety of hard and soft. That gives more of a realistic look. It shows more form, where everything real hard goes flat and everything real soft kind of goes flat too. Kind of a different flatness, but it's definitely flat. Using the dark green of the evergreens here to cut into the yellow green, changing the shape, and just not much, but a few darks down in here just breaks up the yellow green. I could have done more, but just did a little bit just to show that. So use negative painting, especially with trees, where you can use the sky, the background mountains, background trees, to really shape up the trees. Because then the positive painting goes so far, then the negative kind of takes over, and you can really make the shapes a lot more definite looking, a lot more refined looking. They look a lot better. They look more painterly when you can use some negative painting in there. And this one has a lot of variations or layers. We have in the foreground probably this layer of green. Then comes this tree. and all its branches. So this is the second layer. By layer, I mean this one's the foreground, this one's more in the middle ground, this is behind that tree, so this is kind of the third layer. And then you have probably that's part of the third, and then the background layer. So you can have 4 or 5 different layers of trees, and each layer is going to be a subtle color change and or value change, so that I don't want them ending up all looking the same like it does here. In general, I like fence posts, but this fence post is just way up front, way too big, and kind of takes over. So I want to mask these values together. For the foreground greens, a simple dark and light, all the layers or the successive trees as they go back will be bigger, simpler shapes than what the reference shows. So I use some different color green variation and value, and here's you can see I cut out a lot of the detail. This dark, this light goes for the kind of the foreground tree, and this dark, kind of more yellow green, and this light, more yellow green, goes for also that close to the foreground. And that pulls those two trees together. And these are all, even though this is computer, this is my thought process is from my palette. This yellow-green here is more cad yellow light, a little bit of blue, touch of alizarin. Or it could be cad yellow light with a little orange, which makes a yellow-orange, then add a little bit of blue. But the yellow dominates. It also dominates in the shadow. So the shadow over here has more blue, but the shadow here has a bit more yellow. Because it's a yellow-green in this tree, it's going to be a lighter green than this green, which is more blue. So there's a value change there and color change. This is also part of it. And in the background here, a bit more viridian. Viridian and yellow with a little bit of alizarin or cad red, something to mute it. Again, that third color is always the color that mutes it. And then the shadow is blue and viridian with a little bit of probably some yellow and red also. And then the background back in here gets really bluish green, blue with a touch of yellow-orange. And that really separates it. And then the foreground, stronger ultramarine blue and cad yellow. A little bit, same color back in here, just more white. And the same thing with the shadow. It's blue with a little bit of yellow and maybe a touch of cad red. So again, the simplicity is the main thing. If I can force all the foliage I see into bigger, simpler shapes, and then separate them by layers. And here it just gets, everything blends together. I really like the photograph. But if you don't separate it to something like that, you can see the blue-green really shoots back in the distance, and having some negative shapes of it in here, even a little bit more, really helps it. The tree here is still the focal point, but I've punched the color in the greens, made a lot more variety in the greens as well. This is the painting or the photograph I'm going to use in the demonstration. I crop it some. I haven't cropped it yet. Everything I pick I picked because of a certain light quality to it. Real strong light, strong sunlight in the front. I'll probably make this a little bigger, the sunlight in front. Then the big shadows in here, and then the dark shadows in the trees, and then the light background. So a lot of contrast back to front, but I'm going to be doing a lot of negative painting using the blues here to cut into the trees, using the real pale grayed yellow-green in the background to cut into the trees. So the trees are really sharpened and designed by the background. Also the sky, using the warmer sky to cut into it. And the trees, when I look at like a group of trees like this, the main value obviously is the dark. And I want to maybe make a particular dark green here, maybe a little bit lighter dark green here, a different dark green here. So 2 or 3 different greens in the shadow so they're not all the same. This tree here, these greens are more of a yellow green. They're in shadow, but they're a bit more yellow. And then the ones over here on the left are more blue-green, darker, and these are blue-green and darker. So give a little bit of variation. Well, there's the changes. I made a subtle color change here. So right now these greens are a bit too much the same. But it's okay if I start that way. I can always scrub in a color. If I get my values, I think, where I want them, I can always alter the color slightly. But the main thing is always pushing the contrast of the value and temperature. As long as I do that, I can approach the painting with thinner paint, thicker paint, palette knife. Doesn't matter. It's setting up the right shapes, getting in the right value, and then going for temperature. Really changing the color of the greens back in here, here, and then of course it gets blue back in the distance there. Not much color variation yet. At the end of the painting, the demonstration, I will chop in color just for color's sake, just color accents, as long as I keep these shadows a little lighter than these shadows, because they're two different planes. And mine are kind of close here, but they're still darker here on the upright, lighter down here. I have some lighter shadows in the upright, but overall, that overall feel is that the flat plane is lighter, and I want to stay with that. If you can see, if I go back and forth, I've eliminated a lot of those little dots and dashes of greenery and made them into bigger shapes, variations of shapes, but not too many little tiny ones, and using the background to cut in. And I know my my painting is not going to look like the photograph, but it's a place to start and to simplify. So my goal is always to simplify the photograph. Color-wise, my biggest thought is temperature. Cooler greens and violets and warmer greens and pale oranges and things like that. I have the same green here, 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 and here. I just gradually add a little violet to it as it goes back. So I'm just thinking temperature and value in that area. Now moving to some paintings. I have some paintings by some Russian artists. This one is Ivan Shishkin. I really like his paintings. I like looking at them. I don't want to paint this way, but there's such a strong presence to them. Trees really have solid weight to them. And even though these paintings are picky, he was part of the artist group called the Wanderers, and I think their goal was to represent nature as close as possible to what's there. And of course, there was no camera back then, or the camera was really new. So there was a purpose for that then. You can represent what you're seeing with paint, and you can get as close as you can to what you're seeing. Now we have the camera to do that. Tight paintings look photographic, so they kind of lose their effectiveness. But even though his paintings are very tight and very detail-oriented, what still pops out the first thing when you see it, the first thing that pops out is the sense of light, assuming that's his goal. But the value changes, like the shadows on the tree trunk, the real strong definition of dark and light in the tree branches or foliage is just so strong. Then as it goes back, things do get simpler. But for as picky as it is and more detail-oriented, the lights and shadows are very definite and very controlled. So you could see where you could eliminate some of the detail here, and it would still be it'd still be just as effective, because it's not the detail that makes it work. On all his also, he has a low horizon line. His main focus, subject matter-wise, was always trees. So the smaller the horizon line, the bigger the trees. If the horizon line is up here or up here, obviously then the trees are real small and they're not the focal point. But great sense of light. All of these, and I have a few of his here, have a sense of light. This is real nice. Color is very clean. It's not muddy at all. Very representational, very realistic, not impressionistic. And there's, if you move into it a little bit, there's a bit of painterly aspect to it. And this is a nice, huge file. Pretty detailed, but very nice. I can really appreciate it and see it because the values are so accurate, and there's still color temperature there. Not real strong color temperature, but works well. But again, the overall powerful thing is the sense of light. Trees are always the biggest objects, real strong, real definite shapes, but just a beautiful sense of light there. Really nice painted. And you can see where these work better as a 50 by 60 or a 100 by 130 inch painting. Now this is Isaac Levitan, another Russian painter, I think a little later than Shishkin. A bit more impressionistic, but this is one of his color studies. This is not one of his finished paintings, which are more detailed. But you can see in his color studies or his plein air work here, big simple shapes, how he pulls these shapes together here into solid masses. There's not individual stuff. There's a simple dark and light. Same thing with the shadow on here, light and dark, not little stuff. And it works. And I like this because it's more brushwork oriented, where this is more detail oriented. And they're both very different paintings, but they're both just as important. One's not better than the other. This has a better sense of light in that he's pushing the temperature a bit more. A real cool orange here against a real bright, warm yellow orange. The muted violets, muted blues. He's pushing temperature a lot more. and a lot less detail. So the temperature becomes more important and detail is pretty much non-existent. This is another one of his. And this one's more detailed. The image is not as good. It gets more blurred. But a little bit different feel than Shishkin in that the brushwork is a little freer, somewhat looser, even though it's smaller and tends to be more like this. It reminds me of a Willard Metcalf, the way he applies the brushwork. The important part, and what he spent 3/4 of the painting achieving, is these solid dark shapes in the green and light shapes, definite shape. When you squint at it, you see those shapes better. Now he breaks those shapes up, especially over in here and down in there. So you can stop at any point after you've captured the light. Here the light's captured, really no detail, and you can stop or you can keep going and break it up. And it really helps to do both. I have not spent much time doing tight, detailed paintings, but I've done a few, and it's helpful. I don't like to paint that way, but it gives me a better feel for where I want to stop on a painting. Maybe I can carry things a little bit further after doing a few real tight, picky things. But even on the tight, picky paintings where there's more detail, I have to spend 3/4 of my time in the big shapes getting the values and temperature right. This is another Isaac Levitan. Tight, not as tight as Shishkin, but detailed in here, kind of picky. But a lot of big, simple areas too. You know, these aren't detailed much, but beautiful tree. Again, that value contrast is there. He doesn't push the temperature a lot, but he has pushed the color quite a bit. These greens are not real natural looking greens here or here. They're a bit more electric looking, but they're impactful. And again, painting's about suggesting something or making something more obvious than it is or less obvious than it is. It's art, it's not copying. So this is another Shishkin. As you can see, again, very nice light and color, but he does get the detail in there. And there's so much detail, and it's done well. You can almost smell the mud in there. Very nice. I really enjoy looking at well done detailed paintings. Don't want to paint like that, but that sense of light is what makes it work. The detail kind of takes it to a different place for me. Like I could paint this with bigger, simpler, more bold brush strokes, and it would still look just as effective. And maybe even push the color, bluer and blue-green, but it's just different and very, very nice. But I think you have to decide how much detail you want in your paintings with the idea of always thinking less than what you see.